Welcome back to Punk Rock Theologian. It's time for another session of unapologetics, where we don't apologize for the truth, but we learn how to represent our King well in a world that desperately needs it. In our previous sessions, we've been focusing a lot on the internal posture of an ambassador, like leading despite imperfection, preparing ourselves to speak with confidence. And if me calling you an ambassador threw you off a little bit, remember our mandate comes from 2 Corinthians 5:20. It says, so we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. And today we're going to transition into some of these actual conversations. And it's important to remember what an ambassador is and is not. Your role is not to be a debater or a judge. It's not our job to try to put out every fire of every attack that ever comes. The ambassador in a foreign land does not run around making a PR campaign and try to deal with every single person who has an issue with the country they represent. That's not what the ambassador's job is. The ambassador is there to give an honest representation of their own land, to be able to speak on behalf of their kingdom. That's the key element of it. It's not about you or me. The ambassador isn't the point. The kingdom we represent is. And this distinction is a big deal because it's one of the chief reasons that so many spiritual conversations fail, they fall flat. And that's because we are so wrapped up in playing defense. It's like a whack a mole game that somebody lobs a skeptical claim at us, and we feel this immediate anxious pressure that we've got to have some magic bullet answer to give back, or somehow, if we can't defend that attack, it means God is less God or something. And that defensive reflex often leads us to use these hollow, one size fits all kind of answers that don't actually meet the person where they are. And that's a big problem because if we don't understand the person's starting point, then we risk placing more obstacles in their way rather than removing them. That's why Proverbs 18:13 tells us spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Instead of playing whack a mole, I like to think of this more like a game of football. And now I know like 1% of my audience is outside of the US, so I'm talking American football here. And for our purposes, all that really matters is the goal is to move the ball down the field, one play at a time. That's all we're really after here. No football team expects to get a touchdown on every play. In the context of these conversations, we don't always need to see a conversion by the end of it. Just help that person take one step closer to Jesus. Just clear one rock out of the way. The goal is not to win then and there, it's to move the ball. You might be just one tiny piece of the overall process God is using for them. This conversation should be focused on helping them to be more receptive to the next conversation, not less. If we can do that, we keep us and them moving forward. I believe that's why Colossians 4:6 tells us, let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. If we're blowing up and getting belligerent, that's not gracious and attractive, and that's not helping the person have another conversation later. On the contrary, a good ambassador makes statements and asks questions that draw people in rather than shutting them down. If you tell someone what to do, their natural reaction is always to put up a wall, to resist, to fight back. But if you ask them a question, you can get them to think for themselves. For your own life to change, it has to come from something that happens and that matters within you. That's why I can tell you my own story all day long, but until something clicks for you, it's never going to really stick. It's never going to do anything. Your life will not change. And so, to try to avoid getting caught in this cycle of defensiveness and trying too hard to get everything all at once, I want to focus today on some strategic tactics for moving the ball down the field. Tactic number one is tailoring the message. If we look at the story of Paul in Acts 17, it starts out with him among the Jews in Thessalonica, where he grounded his message in the scriptures and in terminology that they knew. Acts 17:2-3 says, as was Paul's custom, he went to the synagogue service, and for 3 Sabbaths in a row, he used the scriptures to reason with the people. He explained the prophecies and proved that the Messiah must suffer and rise from the dead. He said, this Jesus I'm telling you about is the Messiah. He was using stuff that they were very familiar with and just showed them how things that you've already heard for years, that actually is pointing to this. And he was directing their focus. On the other hand, later in the same chapter, Paul speaks to Greeks in Athens And there, his tactic shifts to quoting their own poets, using the local culture as a bridge. In verse 22 and 23, it says, "So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows: Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it: To an unknown God. This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. They had there in their city, they had their culture, and this one specific shrine that was to an unknown God." And he said, "That one right there, you've got this thing already set up. Let me tell you about the God that you don't know." In both cases, he was finding a way to speak their language, to put the message in terms that that person already related with. And so, one of the first and best ways to do that is by using tactic number two. That's just asking the question, what do you mean by that? This is like one of the most important questions you can ask because it forces the other person to define their terms so that we can be sure that we're speaking the same language. We mean the same thing by the same words. As a bonus, this question can buy you some time to think and helps to ensure that you're not mischaracterizing their view. Instead of trying to jump right in and thinking you need a response, throw it back to them, let them define what they're talking about. That lets you answer more clearly and be sure that your response isn't focused on a thing that's not what they were talking about anyway. For a simple example, if someone says to you, "I don't believe in God," ask them what they mean. What do they mean by God? Because that may reveal that what they're rejecting is this idea of an old man with a big long beard sitting on a cloud. And then you get to say, "Well, that's fine. I don't believe in that God either." And our final tactic for today is just another question that's, how did you come to that conclusion? This one is great. It shifts the burden of proof. When somebody makes a claim to you, these bold claims that you find them on the internet all the time, like the Bible is full of contradictions. Well, now that person has the responsibility of supporting this claim. Instead of you scrambling for a defense, ask them to provide their evidence. A great thing about this one is it exposes whether they've actually researched the topic they're talking about or just repeating something they heard somewhere, because it's amazing how many people who will insist that Christianity be able to answer every question in the known universe and beyond will accept a statement against Christianity just because some influencer said it once. For now, I just want you to remember that you do not need to be an expert on every world religion and a PhD in history in order to be an effective ambassador. It is okay for you not to have a silver bullet. Your job is not to solve every problem that ever exists. Your job is to have the conversations, to keep that conversation moving forward, to ask good questions that gets the other person to think. If you can get them thinking and leaning in, that is already a win. So get used to the fact that you will not always have the answer on the spot. It's fine to say, "That's a great question. Let me look into that and get back to you." Like I said earlier, that no one ever expected you to be perfect. No reasonable person expects one guy to have every answer on the spot, especially in an impromptu conversation. So don't be intimidated and go ahead and lean in. Have the conversation. Trust that the Holy Spirit is the one who ultimately moves the heart. And so I'll ask you to begin practicing that. Until we get back for our next unapologetic session, pay attention to the conversations you have. Not just what we think are spiritual ones, but any conversation. And try using either of these two questions. Someone makes a claim or a bold statement, ask, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "How did you come to that conclusion?" Not only does that get them talking and thinking, but it's teaching you to have better conversations. It's teaching you not to get flustered and defensive, but to get a lot closer to what we're instructed in James 1:19. It says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." The more we can ask questions instead of getting defensive, the better we're going to be at that. Next month, we will start reading the answer key that I told you about. And the first one is we'll dive into the challenge of relativism, how to handle the whole "you have your truth, I have mine" argument. But you don't need to wait for all of that to get started. You can focus now on having better conversations, on clearing the path, speaking the truth, asking good questions. Trust the Spirit to help you represent your King and His kingdom.